Thanks for stopping back by to this part 3 and hopefully our final part of this big bore kit on this Evo engine and a cam upgrade as well and new lifter. So let's get back into it and we'll pick up from where we left off of last time. So if you haven't seen part 1 and 2, check it out a couple of videos in the past and then catch up and come along for this video. So welcome back to Butler Customs Motorcycle Shop. Last time we left off, we had a little bit too much free play and it was out of spec in our cam movement. So I had a buddy of mine had some shims and let me borrow one. So that worked out well. I didn't have to wait for one to come in, or it would have been another week's time. And I went with using a 500ths, or what some people will say a 50 thousandths. 0.05. So if you say 500ths, it's a 0.05. If you say 50 thousandths, it's a 0.050. Same difference. So I put that in perfect, lined up perfect. Gave me exactly that 100th or 10 thousandths play, however you want to say it, in my free play of my cam. So now the lifters are lined up. I had some people ask about, well, how did you line up your lifters? Well, the rear is easy to line up because you can actually see the lifters on the cam. What I like to do is, if I'm pretty much sure that the cam or the lifters have never been removed, I will set the lifter blocks back where the bolt lines up exactly where the previous bolt indentions were. You'll see when you take these bolts out, there's indentions of where the little lip here on this bolt sets. And so that's how you know you kind of got it back to where it was before. Yes, they make little, I guess, like bolts that have a beveled end on them that kind of help center. I mean, just pay attention to make sure you're putting them back about in the same place. We got our lifters in. Now I put some towels, some torn up towels in here, and also all around in here, because we're going to clean up where the base gasket is going to sit. Now also, we're missing the stud. We're going to be putting it back in as well. It came out with the bolt, or I guess what you call the long nut. What I've already done is taken a little, I call them plastic razor blades, and cleaned up around. Then I went back with a metal one and cleaned up around. And now I'm going to show you a little tip that'll help you get the rest of that material off really well. So some things to pay attention to when you're cleaning off the case and getting ready for either your new jugs or to put a new gasket in your old jugs back on. The mating surfaces here, where the two case halves meet, you're going to feel that they're not quite level, I guess you could say. And I noticed it especially right here. I mean, it's not a big height difference, but you can feel it. And then you can even catch it with your finger. Not so much here. I can't catch it with my finger here. I can catch it with my finger there, with my fingernail. And then on this side, I can't catch it there. So I'll show you a little tip once you get most of the material off that'll help you. And it just requires a small Dremel brass brush that you can just kind of barely touch to go around this. Definitely don't want to gouge this. You want to best seal you can, flat surface as you can. But those little brass wheels really help get in and around where these studs seat in this case. And that's important. You don't want any junk up around there. And then you've got your oil hole back here. And most Evos, when they will start weeping out of the base, it'll see how this crinkle paint has already just from where the oils come out. Already lifted it up. It will leak right out of here because these head bolts either get loose or the paper gaskets just get worn out. Now, you will always see indentions, but you won't feel it. That's fine. That's okay. That's just where the base gasket set and it stained it. And if you try to get that out, you're going to gouge it. So as long as it's smooth, even though you might still see that line, this is just so smooth right here. You're okay. Now the brass wheel will kind of take most of that out. So that's kind of why I like using it. You know you've got all the debris off. Since we're using this little brass brush here, I will use eye protection because when these things fly out, they fly out quick and in all types of directions. And having this extension on this Dremel is really, really nice feature. Really gets you into some places that you can't get into tightly with just a regular Dremel. This extension really helps. Around those studs is really where you want to pay special attention to, because that gasket material can get caught down in and around there and lay around there, and these dowel pins as well. Now when cleaning around your base, don't ever scrape from inside out. Always scrape in the way that the gasket in a circular motion, because if you make any gouges from here out or here out to the outside, if there's a small gouge, oil can run through that. Now we are using the better James gaskets. They're great. Those base gaskets are really, really good. But still, just kind of work in a circular motion if you can. All that looks wonderful. Looks good. Now I think we're ready to start with our jugs. Now, before we place the jugs on, you'll take some small air pressure, blow this out, and then I'll blow this stud hole out as well, just to make sure, you know, no debris fell down in there. You don't want, once oil pressure gets built, dumping that in the top. So we'll just blow these out, and then we'll move over to our new jugs and pistons and rings and look at those and get those set up and make sure those are all good to go as far as gaps. All right, I did go ahead and replace this stud. Well, it's the original stud, but I got the nut off and I lost the footage. The footage got corrupt. So here's how I did it. I put a pair of vice grips on this, put the vice grips in a vise so it was stable. Then I sprayed really good with lubricant, PB Blast, I believe is what I used. Sprayed several times, let it soak, sprayed again because I could tell it was rusted. I did check the threads, both in this case and on the bottom. They were good. So what I did was I got a big 1/2 inch impact with the right socket on here. And then what I did was I heated up that long stud, okay? That long, it's actually a nut. But I heated it up really well. Stayed away from the threads and heated it up really hot. And then I just used that impact gun just a little bit at a time, and then it popped. So it actually freed, and then it spun on out. Of course, cleaned up all the threads. So you will see a little spinning here where I tried it a couple of different times, but it does not hurt this stud if it just spins inside your vice grips. It actually cleans it up a little bit, but it doesn't warp it, doesn't bend it. But if you just use that gun and just, you know, tap, you're just shocking all that rust that was in there. Remember, there was water that was down in there. And the reason for that is at the top of the heads have a hole in it. kind of for airflow. Well, if you pressure wash your bike or take it to the car wash, all that water is going down in the top of that head, running around, and it just gets, in places it should not get. So we got that in. Now let's work on these new cylinders, new pistons, and checking the gaps and everything for that. Okay, so I hope that you can see here. I try to get you in the best type of angle that I could. Here's the old piston. Now you say, well, when is it time to replace your pistons? Well, these pistons are actually in pretty good shape. There is a little bit of wear here, but that's kind of common. There's no marring. Starting to get a little scratches here. Our rings look like they still have good compression. And the top, though it's carbonated, looks really, really well. So I would be fine reusing these if I was just, building something back. So if at the minimum, if you were just, re-honing this and putting this back in, at least getting new rings for this. Now our cylinder itself is in pretty rough shape. There is no hatch left at all in this, and I'm not sure if you can see it or not. There is no hatch left, and all the curvings are up and down, or all the marks in it are up and down. So this was definitely in need of, getting a good rebuild. You can see where the head gasket set there. There's your dowel pins. And then on the bottom, this is that base gasket. So you can see how thin that base gasket really is from this factory. It's just real thin. The James gaskets or base gaskets are a lot, it seemed to me, thicker or just better well made, I guess. Maybe a different material than what is used here in this one. Now the new one, as you can see, it's just nice, well made. It does have a cast iron sleeve inserted in here. However, I do want to let you know that if you get this brand, this Westco brand, it comes with some instructions, and one of those instructions is that for cast iron sleeve cylinders like this, to ensure proper ring seal, it is necessary to hone the cylinder with a rigid or a brush hone. Do not install a new piston without honing the cylinder, because you have to break this glaze that they put on it that keeps it from rusting. So there is actually, even though it looks like it's honed, there's actually a glaze that they put in here that you've got to take off. That way your rings seal up with the cylinder wall good. So you've got to do that. So we'll be honing these with my stones, giving them a good pass, then soapy water to clean everything out, then a good oiling down to keep it from flash rusting. All right, so this here is my honing tool. It's just a bore tool for any kind of cars or anything. But what you want to do is you want to clean your stones up, make sure they don't have any kind of gouges or anything in them. I think I picked this tool up at the maybe the parts store. So those feel good. And I'll soak these down. They will absorb. Now I did run a rag in this here, just make sure there's no debris in there. Then I'll compress my stones, stick them in there. Okay. Then I'll actually kind of bear hug and give it about good 10-15 passes on kind of a medium speed. Right. And we'll get a rag and clean that up and see how that looks. And now all you're wanting to do is to break that glaze off. That's all. You're not reboring these out or anything. Just breaking that glaze off. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, and then I think that's got our glaze off. That's all you got to do. Now we'll get some soapy water and a spray thing and spray this out, and use a clean rag every time. And then when that rag comes out clean, you know you've got everything. Then we'll oil it down, and then we'll be good to go. With your rings, now that we've got it honed, got that glaze off there, got it cleaned up, your rings will just come in a box, and they will come on top of whatever jug you're working on. Now you can't go by the stock in the manual, the stock ring gap. If you do, it'll be way off and you'll freak out. They give you in here in the instructions the end gap plate, ring gap table instructions. You've got to know your bore, which in this case is a 3.544 bore in this cylinder. Then you times that by whatever application you've got. So you've got a street to moderate turbo nitrous. We're not running that. Late model stock. That's probably going to be our best bet. But if you look, the street moderate turbo nitrous and the late model stock are both the same as the top ring gap and the second ring gap. So the top ring gap, you times your bore size, or you multiply that by this chart here, and that's a 0.005. And that equals, I get my gap here, that equals 0.0177. 0.0177, so almost a 0.018, but we're going to do the 0.0177, 0.017. Now to check these, you will check them from the bottom down. Don't do them from the top. The manual says to check from putting the rings in the bottom. So we'll kind of fit that in there with our fingers. And then we'll take the piston that's actually going to go in this jug, and we'll work it down. I like to work it down till I know my piston is flat here on both sides. I can feel that it's pretty square. We'll pull that out. Then we'll turn until we get our gap here in our light. We'll take our feeler gauge, and we are right there. Right on it. Perfect. Now, our top ring, or our secondary ring gap, which is this thicker one here, it has, so our bore is 3.544. It has a chart of 0.0055. That gives us 0.019 on our filler gauge. 0.019. So we'll run this in. Now that's not oiled up, so be careful. Okay, take your time. Don't scrape up your new hatch job there. Okay. Pull that out, turn it, and find our gap. We'll run that in there, and that is dead on. Perfect. Now there are no specs for your oil ring assembly on their charts. So, but I like to put them in there anyway, just to make sure they're not like overlapping or anything, and look at the tolerance, make sure it's not a huge gap. Now your expander, you won't worry about that because it expands. It's kind of fitted for the piston. Okay, so this is good. I'm going to oil this just so it doesn't flash rust. Then we will put on our rear piston. We'll put the rings on. So I hope that helps. You know, coming in just a box like this, you can kind of get confused as to, well, what rings what? Which way do they go? Well, if they're not marked, they go either way. If they're marked with either a dot or some kind of lettering that has an N, then the lettering or the dot always goes up to the top of your on the top of your motor, like toward the tank. This one has an N as well, so it'll go up toward the top. Some are beveled, some are not. The ones that are not beveled could go either way, and they have no marking on them. These have a marking. If you buy an S&S kit, which they don't offer for the Evos, but on the twin cams they do. The S&S kits, they come really nicely packaged where you fold out each ring and they're in their own packet, and they say top ring, second ring, oil rings, and they're really well packaged. Now, wrist pins, retainers, clips, and then you can go ahead and put one in on one side if you want. If you're kind of stout enough, you can go ahead and put one in with your hands. Make sure it's seated in there good, and you'll hear it snap and clip in. Then when you put your pin in, you oil everything up good. You don't have to worry about it popping out the other side. So you got your one in already. And I always start with my expansion ring. Now the expansion ring has a cutout with 2 points, and you want those 2 points pointing up towards each other like an inverted V. You don't want them pointing down where it makes a V. You want them pointing up where it makes an inverted V, like another little pointy hump. All right, you'll just stick that on that very bottom there. You have an oiler ring you'll stick on, and then we'll move these all around when we get them where we want. I like to go ahead and start it kind of in the bottom underneath the expansion. Work it around. Be careful not to scrape on the sides. And the second oil ring. Okay. And feel with your fingers. Make sure they're seated in there good. We'll move them around once we get them on later. Now our second ring, make sure your marking is up if it has a marking. I like to start in there and then pull out with my other hand to expand that ring just enough to get it over there and there. Now, there are gaps you can check for inside here, but these are pre-fitted for this piston and don't really have to worry about that. Now look at the gap that you have here. The good expansion. That's what you want. On these, they're not expanded out that far, so that's why you replace piston rings if you go in and going to reuse those pistons and just hone. Ring lettering at the top again. I'll start it in that top hole, top gap. And then I'll just slightly expand it as it goes in. There. Now our rings are in. They feel great. Feel really good. Now, okay. So this is the rear head here. On the bike it says rear. You flip it over. This, of course, is your intake here. This is your exhaust over here. Now, if you don't know what's what, you can tell by this. Here's your screws for your bolts for your intake. Then over here, here's your exhaust studs with your nuts and the exhaust ring or gasket. Now, if you look here, your exhaust is smaller than your intake valve. So each piston is going to have a bigger valve for your intake, a smaller valve for your exhaust. Also, you're going to see this flat surface here that's part of this compression chamber, and you're going to have a cutout here as well. So these are easy to match up here. Your intake's bigger here, your exhaust is smaller here, and the cutout here, the relief, goes right there. So on the bike, for the rear, this will orientate this way, even though your arrow is pointing backwards. That's fine. All right, so make sure you have your base gaskets on. Make sure they're down below these little stud stops. Make sure you got your oil hole that's lined up well there. And then make sure your piston now is in the correct orientation. The smaller valve is for the valve release is for the exhaust. The bigger one is for the intake. I read up on these Wiseco pistons, and this arrow is not an orientation pointing toward the front of the motor. It's an orientation pointing always toward the exhaust relief valve. So we've got it here. Here's our cutout here. That is for the head. And then we'll just rotate our rod, being careful of our gaskets, up as high as it'll go. Okay. We'll set that there. And then we'll oil everything up. So I'm going to go ahead at this time and oil these rings up real good, because it's harder to oil them when they're actually on the rod. So I'll go ahead and oil this up real good. Then I'll also get inside the holes here. So that my pin slides in nice and well. Turn that back toward the exhaust. We'll raise this up, and then we'll get our wrist pin started. Oh gosh. Through the side I don't have the pin in. How about that? That might help. Okay. I'll put it to where it's flush there. I'll put the piston over it, and then I will eyeball where that pin slides in, and I'll make sure it's pushed all the way up against the back of this here. That's good. Now we'll go to the other side, and we'll put that retainer pin in, clip in, and then we're ready to set our jug on. Okay, so to put these retainer clips in on this last one over here on this side, they could go flying down, and you don't want them flying down into this case. You have a very bad day. Okay, and I also put one kind of up over here out of the way. So they make a tool for this that I probably need to buy. That'd be a whole lot easier on a man to put these in. So I like to get one fill up in there with my finger, and then I'll take my thumb and actually hold that on there, and then try to get the rest of this worked in and down. All right, and that's snapped in. Now you will want to visually inspect and make sure that that retainer ring is actually seated down in that gap, and that one is. The bottom and secondary ring, they both have markings, so how do you know which is the top, which is the secondary? Well, the one that's shiny, metallic-y looking, that kind of matches the piston, is your top one. The one that is more dull, like your studs, is the secondary ring. Now, where do these orientate? Your top ring here will go right down the center toward the exhaust, right out the back. So that's the orientation of your top ring. The secondary ring will go right up here at the top, pointing toward the front of the engine. Now your oil gaps, your oil ring gaps, the top and bottom one will go here and here. Okay, right towards your studs. Your expander gap will go right here in the middle of these two studs. Piston ring compression kit. And I got this off Amazon, and I've got an Amazon, I'm an Amazon affiliate now, associate. I don't know what that is. Anyway, I can put a link to this, the exact one, down in my description box of this video. And then you can actually purchase this and use this yourself. So there'll be a link down there. Now, on these compression rings, there's an arrow that says bottom and pointing down. But these are for cars. Now, they work fine for these, but these are for cars. So you've got to point the arrow up like this. Because on the cars, you put the piston down. On the motorcycles, we're putting the jug down and the piston up. So the arrow, even though it says bottom, needs to be at the top. We'll give this a little layer of oil. Make sure it's good and clean. And then try to slide this around and not move our orientation of our piston at all. All right, very good. Now there are compression ring or compression tools on there. The cylinder is oiled up and we're ready to go on with the cylinder. We've got the turn this around a little bit. Got the piston down at the moment just a little bit because this rear jug is a bear to get on. It goes on, but boy, you've got to angle it just right, and there's only a certain way that it goes on, and I never can remember that way. And you sure don't want to booger up the new cylinders. Maybe like this. Let's try it like that. Oh. Okay. Maybe like that. Well, I wish I had a better memory. Or that guy that's yelling at me right now watching this. Wish he was here. Saying, no, do it like this. Slides right on. Just can't. I'll tell you one thing. I want to get rid of that zip tie. Because that dude gave us a bear last time. I am going to get rid of that. Just for the moment. Maybe that's why that stud come out on us. So the guys took the stud out to get this on. Now I got it in. I just got to get it over that one. Oh boy, it doesn't like much. But I got to be careful. Okay, maybe if I put it over this one, if I bring it over this one, I think I figured it out, guys. See if approaching it from this way is maybe a little better. I can't remember how this goes. Okay, I don't know how. I turned the camera off because I didn't want 45 years worth of footage of me wrestling with this thing. I brought it in from this back side. I turned it where the cutouts for the push rods are back up against this back frame. It just worked. I don't know how, but it did. So it is on here. Now we've got to lift this piston back up and get it down a little bit like that. I think the compression tool I've got on there, I don't even need that clip. Yeah. It has going on there pretty good. All right. Now I've got to get this out of off the bottom here. Get this ring off. There we go. And I'll bring this up this side. Around there. Yeah, I think I'll use a different one for that front one. It's a little bit easier. Oh yeah. Before I hammer it down, I just want to clean off my new gasket there. Clean off up under here. And then just tap, make sure those rings fit good and feel good. I'll get down there close to the bottom. Boom. And she is in. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get that on video, but man, as soon as I turned that video off, I said I better save my recording because it had gone on a little too long. And as soon as I start, the first try went right in. So I apologize that's not on there. It was a struggle, but now we'll get this front on. Shouldn't be as bad because we got more room to work in here. All right, we got the rings on that one. Everything checked the same as the last time. On the rear, we got the glaze off this jug, or off the cylinder. We've got our top ring gap pointed to the rear of the bike. We've got our secondary ring gap pointed toward the front of the bike. And we have our bottom oil ring this way, top one this way, and our expander pointed toward the rear. Now, it is easier to do that with the piston in your hand and not on here, because then you're trying to, it's a mess. So set your orientations of where your rings go before you put it actually on the rod. Now we got our expander on here, and I used a tighter one this time like I did on the last, because I don't even have to use the tool to hold it, and it's kind of cumbersome by yourself. So now we got more room to slide this one up on here. We will put this piston and line this piston up on here. I'm going to take my arm now and lay on this rear cylinder, and that keeps it from going up and down. Let me move this down just a hair. We'll put that on there. We'll line these up here. Oh, that's going to go down. Let me hold this here. There we go. We'll get our tool off by sliding that out the bottom. It leaves us just enough room to turn it. I want the opening of this compressor to come over this stud here, and then I can raise this up enough to spin this around. It's hard to do when everything's slick. There. Pull that off there. Pull that off back here. Okay. And again, before I pop down on it, I'll clean up this gasket here where just a little bit of oil dripped down. Okay, so I've got everything lined up. I'm going to hold this jug down and just keep tapping on this one. Once it gets close, we'll give it a wiggle and a pop. And that one is down. Very good. Well, I know we had a time with that rear one, but we got her in. We got them all in. Boy, that's beautiful. Cross hatching where we took that glaze off is beautiful. Beautiful. I'm going to show you this. If you can see that in there, how beautiful that is. Isn't that pretty? We'll do the valves. We'll lap the valves, get them cleaned up, and put some new stuff on that. Then we're ready to set our heads back on. All right, time to start working on these dirty, nasty heads. We're going to do a valve job on these as well. And we're going to take all this old head gasket stuff off. So this come off kind of, I guess you could say pretty clean, because the whole head gasket come off with it. So we might get lucky here and not have much material left behind, but no, we're going to have some of it. I'll take a razor blade and I'll just go around here. Don't worry about it if it drops in any holes. So we're going to clean those out once the valve job's done. You want to make sure your razor blade is nice and smooth or nice and level. And once most of that's off, you're going to see quite a bit of residue, and you may even feel a couple little spots. So what I like to do, instead of keep digging with this and creating scratches, I'll take my Dremel tool with the brass wheel on it, and I'll go around getting all of the material off. All right, now we got the head nice and smooth. Now you'll still see it looks like it has material on it, but it doesn't. That's just the imprint from the original gaskets that's been on there, well, since they probably built it. Spray some carb cleaner around it. Be careful around your black paint. We just want to get it off. We'll clean it again after we do the valves, but I like to go ahead and get the most of it off before we do the valve job. And that's nice and smooth. I know it might not look like it, but it is. All right, now we can flip it over. I will take a small screwdriver that I like to use to get this exhaust gasket out. I'll just grab it, pop it out, and then I'll take this little screwdriver and kind of clean around the ends here real good. Clean out. I just want that gasket to set good. You don't want any types of exhaust leak because you just didn't clean some carbon off. Take our new gasket now, start it in there. You'll find with these new gaskets, they don't fit all the way in flush. So you get the majority of it put in with your fingers till it seats. And then you'll take your screwdriver and poke the rest down. It's nice and flat. And when your exhaust goes on and cranks down, it'll cushion form. This gasket will form to that exhaust. Okay, now we're ready to take the valves out. Now I'm not going to clean the tops here, and I'll show you why. I want to take the springs and valves out first. That'll give me a smooth surface so that I can go around here and not have to go over it on just the tip of the razor blade. Now here's our two new valve seals that we've got going in. These are the upgraded kind opposed to stock. So these have the little spring here and nice insulated inside, and these are a nice upgrade. So we'll be putting those in. To put those in, go ahead and grab you a 12mm socket, because that fits in perfect and gives you something to insert it with so you don't mess those little rings up here on top. Now I do have a spring compression kit. It's ONT. I got it off Amazon. I'll put a link down there for it. It comes with different sizes. I like to use the bigger size and then the next biggest size. So a 30mm, a 25mm. And I'll show you how this works. You'll need one of these with the snap-on things like this. They just snap on. And then you'll need the one that's got the hole in it to run your little tool through to give you a handle. And then of course you'll need this. You'll run the little ball attachment end in to the inside until it pokes through. And I'm going to use the big one on that end. Do the same for this end. Now this doesn't have the little hole for the T-handle because this is going to be the end that just goes up against the valves. So instead of just this little point sitting on the valve, I go ahead and snap one of these in. Still gives you enough room to go around the cylinder head. So before we take valves out, let's do a little test. Now this is the front cylinder head. They are labeled here. If it's an OEM, it'll say front right there. If you have an aftermarket one, it might not have that labeled, but you'll know which is which because this is where your push rods go in. This is the mount for your center mount. Here's your intake, here's your exhaust. So you know this can't go on the back with the intake coming out this way. So you won't get them mixed up if you know what you're looking at. But before we pull the valves, I want to test the valves. Now I've already done the rear cylinder. It had an oil leak in the intake and it had a leak in the exhaust. So by looking at this might be a little better, but I believe it's got an oil leak in the intake as well. And the problem is those OEM seals around the tip, they'll get real hard. That rubber there will get real hard and it'll let oil pass through. But before we do that, let's put a plug in here, flip it over. And what I'm going to do is pour a little bit of gas in it and see if anything kind of leaks out. All right, we got a little bit of gas here, and what I'm going to do is just pour it right in there till it covers up the top. Pour it a little too much. And you'll either see some air bubbles, or you'll see the gas go down, or you'll even see it running out of the bottom where your seals are. So this looks pretty good. We're going to go ahead and do the valve job anyway, but I do see that it's leaking down. Not evaporating, it is leaking down here. All right, so we'll pour this out, and I do see some gas right around here on both sides. So we'll go ahead and start. Let's start with the intake, and I set the head up on the side like this. It's easier to get in to both sides. And then I want the one with the T handle to be up here, and then the other one to set right in the center of that valve. I'll just tighten it with my hands here so it gets kind of snug. Make sure it's in the center of that valve. Then I'll move this up at an angle where I can see the keepers. So I'm going to tighten this and try to keep this centered on top of that keeper washer, and it might pop when it actually starts to come off. And if you've got it centered right and you take it down enough, the keepers will be exposed. And then you take your little magnet, bring one of the keepers out. And I like to keep these keepers with whatever valve we're working on. Now we can very gently take the pressure off that spring. It will pass over the valve stem now. Then we can take our tool off, set it to the side. Now we've got our top here that actually holds the keepers together. You've got an outer spring and you've got an inner spring. Now you can measure these to see if they're within spec. We are going to reuse these springs. You can go with a more high compression spring, but we've chose to keep these springs. There's the cap, and I'll keep the keepers over there with it together. Now we can go ahead and just push this valve out. And what we'll want to do is inspect this valve really well. You want to look for any wear up here that you can feel, none there. And then any wear down here that you can feel, none. Too bad there. We'll clean all this up. Now you can see, well, I don't know if you can see or not, but this here is wet and sticky with oil. Oil should never be here. This is the intake. It should be nice and dry, not oily. So that's how I knew by looking at the head when we pulled it off that there was oil around the ring and oil bypassing and getting into the actual combustion chamber. So this is super, super sticky. The rear intake was even worse than this. And you can also kind of inspect your valve ridge there, the seating ridge. We're going to be lapping these again. So there's the valve. Now this is this seal here. It's a little cap about that size. On these are a little bigger. Now you want to be careful getting these out, especially if they're stock like this. This right here, be very hard. This rubber piece, just from years, and it will not bounce back. See how it's going in, but it's not taking its shape back. With heat over the years, and it just breaks down and gets hard, and then lets oil go down in here into your valve stem, and evidently, or eventually, into your combustion chamber. So that's not good. It'll foul out your plugs. It'll smoke. It could cause it to run a little even hotter because that chamber's now having to deal with oil and gas and combustible air and then spark. Now you'll also find that at the bottom of this, you can kind of take you a little pick, or in my case, this little screwdriver, and then take you a little magnet. And I like to get these out of here. Some people don't mess with these, but I like to get them out, and then I'll actually clean under them. I'm just going to wiggle this a little bit. It should come out. Another sign that this seal here is bad is this won't clear that seal anymore. Usually these just slide right out. Keep that in there for now then. Let's take this seal out. You can use, I think a 7/16 will fit in there under the seal and pop it up. You do not want to take anything and grab it like this, because you could break that seat off. Then you have to press the seat out, put a new seat in. And then depending on if it's, stock or if it's board, or you can get into a big mess. So what I do is I get a pair of pliers, I go under it and I kind of lock my pliers in, and then I'll just use my hand to kind of pop the back of the pliers, and they pop right off. So here is a stock seal, and you can tell there's nothing inside here but metal. So it's metal on metal. These have a coating on the inside, same as on the top, and a spring that keeps tension on that valve, so that even if these start to wear out or get hard up here, that spring still keeps tension and oil from coming down through there. Pretty neat. Now I'll just kind of wipe this off here. Now we should be able to get that bottom spring seat out. And they just kind of get stuck in there sometimes just because of the oil that gets up under them. Okay, so that'll come out, and that's the bottom here that your spring sets into, both your inner and outer spring. Now I like to do one valve at a time, so I'll leave this one here and I'll work on this one. Now I'm going to lap the valves before I put the new seals in. Now putting these new seals in the James gasket kit, it gives you instructions for how deep to seat these. And surprisingly, it's not deep at all. If you push them down in there too far, that spring won't do its job and kind of defeats the purpose of it. So we'll leave this here for now, flip this over, and we'll inspect our seat here. We'll go ahead and pull this plug back out. So as you can see, it's all just oily and gummy in there, real sticky, and it should not be at all. So I'll take some carb cleaner and spray in there. That helps loosen everything up, gets all the crud and corrosion out. And it was definitely time for a valve job. I don't know if you can see this or not, but you see all this oil build up here, kind of carbon build up, and all around up here. Look at all that. See that? A lot of people, they'll do a valve job, but they won't think to clean this top part up here all the way around this. Get you a Scotch-Brite pad, make sure it's the green pad. Take you some WD-40, PB Blast, whatever. I like to spray it right in the middle, and then I'll fold it and I'll stick it down in there, and I'll just work around where the valve sets. I'm just trying to get all that carbon off before we re-lap it. You can see how much is coming off there. Clean it up good. We'll also inspect the top of the seat to make sure it's nice and clean, and it is. You see that oil that was down in there building up? This is your intake. That should be spotless, clean as a whistle. And it's not. So now you can even see in here all the oil buildup in there. So that is a telltale sign that your intake was leaking oil down through the stem. All right, now we'll flip it over. I will kind of clean off around the seat. I'll flip this up like this. And I'm left-handed, so I'm going to run it this way. Now our valve. A lot of guys will put this in a chuck and a drill, and they'll go over on their wheel, brass wheel, and they'll start, spinning this, or let me turn this light away from you. There we go. They'll start spinning this on the wheel, and they'll try to get all this off where it's just shiny. Do not do that. Don't do that. Do this by hand, at least this part. Because you put this on the wheel and you mess up this right in here, or you take a little too much off, it'll never seal, no matter how much you lap it, because you've taken too much material off on one little spot. So what I do, again, just PB Blast, WD-40, get it on there good. Don't forget the stem. Grab your Scotch-Brite pad, and you're just going to do this by hand. I'm going to do the cup on the bottom, because with my fingers I can feel if I'm getting on the edge or not. I don't want to get on the edge of this. I'm just trying to clean a little bit of carbon off that. Now I'll take it and do the back here. Again, I'm just rubbing the very top here, not where my valves are going to be. Getting all that crud and all that oil build up. Now I'll grab my stem. I'll do that as well. Then lastly, I'll take and just kind of go around the tip just to get off anything that might prevent it from sitting down real flush there. This feels good and smooth. Take my cloth. Look at all that that's coming off. Now I want to show you what little time I did that. I didn't use it on a big machine. I didn't take too much off. But look at how that is. Look at how clean that is. See that? Beautiful. Stem's nice and clean. It feels good and smooth, and look at the top. Now you will find a little bit of buildup around here, and that's fine. Just take this and go right around the edge there, but not getting on the corners. If you have to have it spotless, you can do that now. Wipe it off again. Look at that. I don't feel anything. Nice and smooth. It doesn't matter the color. And now this is ready to be lapped. Now the lapping compound that I use a coarse grade. I use that twice, and then I go with a fine grade twice. So I'll show you a little something on this. When you put your coarse grade on, you're going to put it on pretty liberally, and I'll show you why. Don't go crazy with it, but you don't want to waste it. Now, instead of using this again, I'm going to take my finger. I'm going to go around and just kind of get it all on that corner there where I want it. I'm not pushing down. I'm just getting the excess off. Just like that. Get the excess off the bottom there. Now I'll take my finger and wipe that right there. And then that's my second round. So I've saved on this. All right, we'll just stick this in. And you can look up in here in the hole and get the stem lined up with the seat, and you'll push it all the way in. Now I will use a hand tool here, power tool. I'll get this on here. I'll lock it, and I'm going to go not even half speed, and I'm going to use this finger over here as my in and out. And then I'm going to go about quarter speed, and I'm going to go about 10 times until I feel it with my finger stop grinding. It's getting smooth. So I've got the valve pushed out where it's not touching anything. I'll get the speed I want, and then I'll go in with it. That's good. Now I'll take this out and I'll inspect. I'll clean this up. We're going to go another round, but for the first pass, you can see we've got a nice, smooth, not pitted, clear seat. Now we'll spin this around and we'll inspect our head. And that looks really, really good. Now we'll go back up. We'll grab this and look. Grab this right here. Now we've got enough to go a second time. Sorry, I'm trying to keep you in the shot. You keep moving on me. Be still. All right. And it's just enough to cover really well. And you don't waste it. Let's put that back in. Slide that up on there. Lock this down. Push it out. Take that off. Pull it back out. Get us a cleaner cloth this time. And look at that. I'll try to zoom you in here when I go back and edit it, but that's beautiful. Now you can measure that and see if it is within spec. I've done enough of these to tell you that is perfect. That's dead on. So we still got to pass through our fine. Flip this over and wipe all the coarse grit off. And here's where people forget now. Take your little screwdriver, a little pick, and go in around here and get all that fine, that coarse grit off. See all that? You forget and leave that in there, and that could cause you problems. A lot of people forget to do that. Now I'll stick my fingernail in there and kind of clean it out. Not want it perfect right now because we still have another pass with the fine, 2 more passes with the fine grit. I've got a little spot here I'm going to work on. There. Beautiful. Well, that looks beautiful. All right. So our coarse grit's over. Let's get our fine grit out now. Set our head back up. This is the first pass on the fine grit, so again, we'll go a little thick. That'll give us enough for our second pass. Stick that in. Even better. Some guys go crazy with the grits, but it's only hitting a fine line, so you're really wasting a lot of it if you just gob it on there. All right, last time here for this. That felt good and smooth. Pop this out. Now some people tell you, well, you need to oil this when you're doing that, but you don't really do it that many times to oil it. We'll oil it when we put it back together. So there's our final product there. Beautiful, beautiful. And our surface and seating here is beautiful, beautiful. Now I will take carb cleaner. We'll spray that out. We'll take a clean rag this time. Clean all this off. Now we're ready now to go in with our new James gaskets valve seals. They're these, and they will go a 1/4 inch in. So I've got this little nice tool that does angles and depth. Take you a fine point Sharpie or even a pencil, and you'll just want to set it down to where it's a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch deep, and then you'll just want to put you a little mark there to where that's going to go in. Now we'll take one of our seals. We'll take a 12 socket, long socket. You don't have to pre-oil these. Just fit it on there, and then you'll just kind of wiggle it and work it down. And you want it to go down right to your line, no further. That's their recommended depth, and now it's going to look high, but that's how they're designed to be. Now we're ready to put our stem in. We'll take a little bit of oil. We'll oil up the stem. You don't want too much oil. You don't want it running down in your valve down there. You just want oil to pass up through there. Now, the manual says take a piece of clear tape and tape around it so that these ridges do not hurt this. However, I've found that these James seals are really great seals, and I've never had an issue with putting it in. Now, I don't monkey it in. Take your time putting it in. So let's get this started in like that. And then with your hand, you can eyeball it and watch it balloon out. Balloon out. There you go. And that's your seal there. All right, don't know how much we lost on that because the battery went dead on my GoPro. So if you missed anything, I apologize. All right, we'll clean this up. Now remember, this flat side goes down. The two cupped sides go up. Get some fresh oil in there. Slide that back on. Make sure it's pushed down. Some new oil around that. Inner spring. Outer spring. Yep. Some oil around that. Get a tool. I like to start at the bottom just to make sure I'm in the center. I sure don't want to chip a valve corner off. There we go. Yeah, I found it best not to let this arm fall. Keep this arm up. Now, I know my mitts are in the way. You won't be able to see much. But once you get it lined up, it is a really good tool. I like this better than using the ones that compress the spring, like it grabs the springs. I like this better because you don't have to worry about it damaging the springs. I got my keepers where I want them. Get a light and make sure. Oh yeah. Bring this out slowly. Okay. All right, let's do our check. Keeper check. It's always scary time. Very good. Now sometimes when you seat these keepers in, one will be like kind of closer together on touching the other side of the keeper than the other side. And that's why you do that. When you do that hammer, that pound test, it lines everything up. The springs compress and it lines that keeper up. I mean, you're not going crazy with it, but you do want a little force. You don't want to go so crazy that you run your valve stem all the way out and hit the table, or your valve out to hit the table. So at this time, this is done. Now, I will clean up here, but like I said, it's not much. I'll just take my little, put a new brass wheel on and just clean up around here. If you were going to razor blade it, of course you'd do that with these off. But now these are in, our new seals are in, which it needed, our new gaskets in over here. We're going to wait and do these pushrod tubes gaskets when I do the bottom ones and the whole assembly together. But as you can see here, got a little bit of trash in there. This looks nice, so much better than what we were working with. And now it's cleaned all the way around. It's sealed. It's seating good. I'll blow out all these holes for any debris. I will clean this again and the top as well. And now both heads are ready to go on the bike, and we'll torque them down. One thing I did forget to mention, take your bolts out of your intake and clean this surface right here. So now we got our intake nice and smooth. You may still see a little ring. That's just from where the heat cycles and the rubber is kind of embedded down in there, but you don't feel anything. nice and smooth, and so these are ready to go back on. All right, we're ready now to go ahead and put our head gaskets on. I've had these covered up. I'll wipe off any debris here. Boy, these are beautiful. Beautiful. Get some of this excess oil out of here so it don't smoke so much when we start it up. All right. Now we've got our new little dowel guides that go in here. Gonna get those started. Oh, that one slid right on the end. And, oh, hey. Usually you gotta kind of hammer them in. We'll make sure they're seated down there well. And now you'll notice when you go to put the cylinder head gasket on, you'll notice that when you put it on, it's kind of floppy, and it could easily get kind of cattywampus on you. So there's something you have to do first before you install this head gasket. And what that is you have to install new O-rings. So your head gaskets will come with new O-rings. And what I like to do is I never put a rubber O-ring on without it being lubricated. I just want a light film, and I'll go ahead first and put these over the dowels. The reason I do that is that when you put the head gasket on, it lines up around those dowels. So don't put the head gasket on first. Put these O-rings on first. Make sure they're seated down. Then when you go back with your head gasket, they will set down in those holes around the O-rings, and they will not move. And if one side's kind of bent a little bit, flip it over. So there, now that head gasket doesn't move at all. And now this rear cylinder head is ready to go on. So we'll take our cylinder head, we'll make sure that bottom is nice and clean. And we'll take our head and then we'll eyeball those dowels underneath to get them to line up, and it'll set right on top. Now I'll go ahead and kind of work on this rear. We've got our bolts here, two different sizes. Okay, we've got a small one and a long one. The short ones go up here on the front where your spark plugs go. The long ones go in the back. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to oil these, fill them full of oil, set them up, let them sit there, let them soak in that oil. Then you'll blow that oil out. Don't just drain it out. You'll have to blow it out. You don't want to hydrolock these or you won't get a proper torque. So you blow all that out, and then that helps just give it a little coating of oil inside so you get the proper torque. Now also you'll want to just lightly oil this and the bottom of this head here that's going to actually set against your cylinder head. That'll help you as well to get a good torque on it. And you'll just slide your bolts in. You'll make sure the shafts are kind of cleaned up on those as well. And they should start just threading in immediately. If not, then you don't have something lined up properly. So you might have to lift the head up again just to make sure it's setting where you want it. So those are doing good. Now to save a little time, I will use this because it's a variable speed. It's just not one speed. So I can lightly pull the trigger and get that to go slow. I don't want any torque down on these head bolts. I just want them down to where they're close to touching. Close to touching. Don't let them actually touch. I just want them close to touching. It just saves me some time instead of finger tightening them all. Then I'll go back here and just finger tighten them down for now. Now we'll start our torque sequence. Start with bolt number 1. This one right here in the back in the center. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Start with 1. We're going from 80 to 106 inch-pounds. And we will be tightening these again. So I'm going to hit it about the middle, and I'm going to do about 95 inch-pounds. Well, yeah, 95 inch-pounds. Now that's not foot-pounds, that's inch-pounds. So that's what we're going to go to now. So 95 divided by 12 gives us right at 8 foot-pounds. So we will, the lowest I can go here is 10. And I think that'll be fine. It's not much at all. That's 1. Let's go 2. 2. We'll do 3. And we'll do 4. All right, that's the first pass on the rear cylinder. Now the second pass is 142 to 168 inch-pounds. Okay, that's 14 foot-pounds. We'll start with number 1. Okay, got it tight, didn't it? Then we'll do 2. And we'll do 3. And we'll do 4. That's our second pass. Now the third pass is make a vertical mark with a permanent marker on each bolt head. Make another mark on the cylinder head. Turn each bolt a quarter turn clockwise using match marks as a guide. So 90 degrees, a quarter of a turn is how we're going to go. Okay, I'm using a chalk mark because it shows up a little bit better on that black than a black Sharpie would. All right, now we're going to get a 90 degree on that. And I'm just curious, what poundage is that? That's 40 foot-pounds. Okay, so it's somewhere between 35 and 40 foot-pounds is that final torque. So I guess going that 90 degree turn really torques it down quite a bit. Now we'll do this here. We will mark right there. And then we'll go 90 degrees here. A quarter turn. Looks good to me. And then we'll turn this in one turn. All right, we'll do this one. Good thing about using a chalk marker is you can wipe it off pretty easily. All right. And then I'm going to start right here and then end right here. All right. According to the book, that rear head is torqued down. Now we'll just do the same for the front. Now the sequence in the front, as far as pattern, is different, but the torquing is the same. On this one, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So a little bit different. And again, realize they made different Evo motors. So you need to check for yourself what year motor you have, as some of the applications might be different. All right, now we got our heads torqued down and they're good and sturdy and ready to rock and roll. Now, Before we put the rockers on and the rocker boxes and spacers and all that, while that's all off, it is a lot easier to go ahead and put your intake manifold on. These bolts do not require any thread locker because they're going to just get tight being there by the heat anyway. So you don't have to do that. We'll get our intake. We'll put our new gaskets in. I'll show you that. I'll get you moved around here where you can see inside here, and then we'll install these. So on this intake, especially if you've been leaking around here, as you can see, this one has been. See how it's nice heated color here, but then you have blowout here. This one is fine, but on this side he had been leaking, and that is the rear cylinder. So to get these old ones out, just take you a pick or anything really to get down into that rubber, and you'll want to pull it up, because a lot of times these things you can pull them out like that and then just pull this off. Man, those have been on there a good minute. You'll see that this is tapered, and you'll find that your new rings are tapered as well. So those just fit down in there so that it will set flat. As this compresses, it'll compress that ring in. So I'll go ahead and kind of clean off this right here a little bit, get it nice and smooth. It was a little oily too, so I guess it had been leaking there. So what I like to do is I'll take this, I'll go ahead and put this on, and then I'll slide this O-ring over it. I've found that that kind of is the easiest way for me to do it. That dude's stuck on there. This was the one that was leaking, so it's going to be in bad shape. Ugh. Nasty. I'll clean this off as well. New O-ring, we'll put this on with the flange side facing out. We'll take this and stick that down as well. These cutouts will go toward the back. Now we can pull this boot off here. Your kit will come with a new one. Now, you don't have to put it on at this time, or you can go ahead and put it on. It's really up to you. It's easier to do while it's off than it's on there. Now I will go ahead and run just a thread in on these back bolts here. The reason for that is that these cutouts help you stick that in there and twist these kind of lined up where they need to go. You'll take your other bolt, move it till it finds the hole, and raise your other one up as well. Now if you got long enough fingers, you can run your fingers in there and make sure that that gasket is not pinched out or got moved on you when installing. Now you'll see this floats. So what I like to do is kind of get it finger tight on these front ones, and then move this to where it's kind of same space on both sides. A lot of people don't pay attention to that, and you could get a leak if one side's all the way up here and this side is gapped pretty bad. So also with this, you got to pay attention to your angle. So we want this to be pretty much level. Remember, the carb's going on here. Once you tighten these down, it's going to be kind of hard to move this. So just try to make it as level to the motor as you can, and you should be within the ballpark there. So you don't have to twist this too much to get the carburetor to fit in where it lines up with your breather holes. Okay, that looks about right. We'll get a wrench and tighten those down. Okay, so we tighten those down on both sides. We got a good even gap between the two, good and level here. And I just use the cutoff end of a 1/4 inch Allen and then a 1/4 inch wrench, and just get them good and snug. I've never seen these back out because of the heat. They kind of stay in there. So you don't have to thread lock them, just get them really good and snug, because you'll see when you get these off and try to get these off, it's really hard to get them off. Now we can go ahead and move on to our rocker boxes. Now before we throw our push rods in, we got to replace our O-rings. So you'll have a packet in your kit that's got just a bunch of, looks like the same size O-rings, and that goes to your push rod tube assembly and all that good stuff. So there's a bunch of them. There'll be different sizes. You will have some that are bigger and flatter, some that are fatter and smaller, and some that are flatter and smaller. So what you'll have here is 4 smaller flatter ones, 4 bigger flatter ones, and then 4 fat ones that are smaller in diameter. So on the bottom here, you can go ahead and pull this one off. You will have a metal spacer there, and you'll have a big flat one. So a big flat one is that right there. It goes on that, lines up good. It's a good idea while you've got that out to kind of clean out where this metal O-ring set. Clean the metal washer off, set it down in there, and then take your new O-ring. I'll just put a little bit of oil on it. Put our metal washer in. Get this oiled up, put that in. Make sure it's seated down in there really well and nice. And now you'll have some up here as well. You may have to push it out from the top if they're in there good. Get this here. And that's why I wait to do these when I'm doing them all. As you can see, this is a little smaller, but it's fatter. And so we got the new smaller, fatter one there. And don't ever put your old ones in the pile of your new ones. You might get them mixed up. Oil this up a little bit. We'll shove that right back up in there. We'll make sure it's seated good, and you can also look down in the hole there. Make sure it's up in there good, and it'll stay up in there. Now you'll have a push rod assembly, and you'll slide this off, and then you'll see that there is a rubber O-ring, a metal ring, and your spring. So you'll want to clean all this up and then put it back in that order. I'll take everything off and just give that push rod a good wiping down. If it's kind of rusty like that, it's a good idea to just take your green Scotch-Brite pad, clean that up. There, looks a lot better. Now everything will slide real good. We got our rings, and you can tell that people have been pressure washing their bikes with all the rust on that spring and all the rust on this washer. And then you'll take your smaller, flatter washer, and that sets our ring. That sets on there. We'll pull it up pretty good too. And then you'll have the tube that's lipped and got a little seat there. So the lip part goes up in there. I will look down in here and I'll re-oil on top of those lifters. Now I'll go through right here with this. I'll take our newly assembled push rod and I'll put that up in there, and all I'm going to do is just kind of set this down for now. Okay, so I lost a little bit of footage, and it was very important footage. On your push rods, if they're stock, they're going to be color coded. Your blue and your purple is going to be your rear. Your yellow and green is going to be your front. You're going to see that one is longer than the other. The green one is longer than the yellow one, so that's your exhaust. The exhaust is always longer than the intake. So you're going to take your mouth and blow through that hole to make sure there's no obstructions in that hole. You go ahead and grease it up good, oil it up good, slide it down with the tubes down in it as well. I don't think I can do this with one hand. Yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Now you pull these up and you want to make sure that's setting on that lifter and centered in that lifter, and in this one as well. Then you're going to put your tire in the highest gear, and you're going to rotate until you see that these two are both at their lowest point that can be. And the reason that you do that is that then you know their lifters are off the cam lobe and at the lowest point. If you try to look down in here and do it without the push rods in, it's hard to see, especially since you've oiled the top of the lifters. And it's kind of hard to see if they're all the way down. So this is a sure-proof way to see. And you can actually watch them go up and down. So you know when they get to their lowest point. You know when it starts going back up, then you back the wheel back up and it goes back down. So to me, that's a lot easier. All right, I lost some audio in this clip. I'm sorry about that, guys. I'm still trying to figure out all this video and stuff, so bear with me. But I guess I forgot to turn my mic on during this time. So we're getting ready to put the cylinder head or the head on. I'm sorry, the rocker assembly on. And there's the gasket that goes underneath the rocker box assembly. And I think I'm explaining here that if you set it on there first before you do the before you put the rocker arm assembly on, that it's just going to slide down and you're going to have a hard time trying to line the gasket up once you get the rocker assembly on. So really nice gaskets as well. But what I like to do is I'll actually take the rocker box assembly, put the bolts in it, and then actually put the gasket up through the bolts and set them all up there together as one thing. Yeah, so like that right there. And you can hold it on the sides, and with the cutout on the top of the heads, your fingers don't get in the way there. And so you can take that whole thing with all the bolts in and use your thumbs to move your arms around. And on this front cylinder, you can set the whole assembly up there together with the gasket, and it'll fall right into place, or it should fall right into place. Now you want to make sure your push rods are up on your rocker arms and setting in their pockets, and then you can just start turning your bigger bolts that hold the rocker arm assembly down, and then your 5 smaller bolts. 3 of those are 7/16 heads, and 2 of those are 3/16 Allen head back in the back. So we'll just tighten those down, and then I believe we'll torque them here in just a second. Alright, so when you're wrenching down these 4 1/2-inch bolts, you'll want to go a little bit at a time and then check to make sure you can still turn those push rods there. Both push rods on whatever cylinder you're working on. Even when you start to begin to torque them and they're down, the rocker arm boxes are down on the head, you'll still need to be very careful about those push rods. What you've got to do is to let those push rods start bleeding down, or actually the lifters will start bleeding down, and then the push rods will become loose. So what I'm doing here is torquing down these 4 bolts first, the 1/2-inch bolts, and I'm checking the push rod as I'm doing that to make sure that they still turn, that the lifters are going down. So if you're doing this and those push rods get tight, stop. Take you a break for 4 or 5 minutes, come back, see if you can turn those push rods again. If you can, then the lifters have bled down, and you can keep tightening down the head bolts. I believe, or the rocker arm assembly bolts. I believe these were 18 foot-pounds, but don't hold me to it. But now you can see I'm trying to turn these push rods, and looks like they're spinning good. And I think I'll even mark them with some chalk here, just so you see a visual of what that looks like. Maybe that'll help you. So see. Now, I also check for up and down movement and make sure there's no lash at all. There's no kind of movement up and down. You don't want that. These are solid lifters, so they are what they are. They're not adjustable, and they should, or solid not lifters. Sorry, solid push rods, and so they're not adjustable. And what they are is what they are. But you want to make sure they're not under any tension, that you got everything back together well. All right, now I'm just going to tighten up those 5 smaller bolts. 3 of those are 7/16 head, and then last 2 on the outside toward the left of the bike is a 3/16 Allen heads. So you just tighten those down. You don't have to worry about any type of order with those, because you've already got your 4 big bolts down, and it's not, when you tighten these 5 bolts down, they're not going to affect the push rods. So you can just go ahead and tighten those down and torque those. Alright, so we'll clean off this in case we got any debris on it, and then we'll get our rubber gasket that goes on this underneath that center spacer. And what you're going to find with these is, on one side it's a straight side, and on the other side it's curved, and you can match that up with the rocker arm that matches that. So you'll have one side that's curved and one side that's long. Just make sure everything fits down in the grooves. You don't have to use any kind of sealant or super glue or anything. Usually they lay in there well, and there's a pretty good sized groove that they lay in. So just make sure everything's down and well. Alright, so with this middles, I just call it a big spacer because it's kind of all it is. This head spacer, or I put a new umbrella valve in there, and take some needle nose pliers and just pull that nipple up through there so that it seats in there good. The other valves look fine, but they come with new ones, so we'll put a new one in there. Make sure that your bottom is nice and clean, and before it sets down on that rubber surface. But you can see how well that rubber gasket's setting on there and inside these grooves. And alright, so that's ready to go on, and you just slide that on over top. The front cylinder is super easy to work on. It almost feels like you have the motor out of the bike. There's so much room. And just set that down on there easily. It should set there well. And then we'll go ahead and get our other gasket that looks a little bit different than the one we just put on, but again, it's got a curved side and a straight side, and a curved side and a straight side on that spacer. So when you put that on there, it'll set right down where it's supposed to. I've seen guys put these on backwards, and where that's got a curved side and a straight side, it sticks out and it leaks, and I've had to go back in there and fix it. So pay attention to that. Now, don't forget this little center rubber gasket that goes right in the middle of where your rocker arm assembly is. A lot of guys forget that when they put that other gasket on. They forget to put that in there. And it goes right in the center. You'll see me drop it in. It'll be kind of a quick thing. There it is right there. Don't forget that. If you do, you'll get oil leaking down right on top of your cylinder heads. So a lot of people forget that out of the pack and forget to put that on. So let's go ahead and get this top cover on now, and you'll see that we've got some of that. I guess it's like a metalish paper kind of washer that goes on for this year of Evo. Some years use metal washers, and some years, or brass washers, and some years use these paper gasket-like washers. And you need to know which one to use for yours. Don't just look at what come off yours. Look up for the specific model, because it's important. It gives it a proper torque, because you're torquing down not just the cover, but that center spacer and two gaskets as well. So when you torque that top, you want to make sure that you've got the right washers on there, because I have seen those bolts break because you do torque them down quite a bit. So just keep that in mind. All right, we'll grab our cover now that it's cleaned off of all the old gasket material, and we'll set it right up on there where it matches everything, and it usually sets there pretty well. You don't have to hold it. And then our bolts, make sure to look up underneath, because your bolts will have a washer on it that stays on the bolt, but look up underneath there and make sure you don't double gasket, meaning you've got to take that old gasket off, that old washer gasket off, and they come off easy. You might have to use a pocket knife on some, and then you go ahead and put your new washer on there. But you got to check up underneath there, because they'll stick up on there and you won't see it, or they'll stick to that cover and you won't see it. So just clean them up, put the new washers on, and throw the bolts in, and then just tighten it down. Alright guys, so I got this back part together. I'm shooting this section on my iPhone because my GoPro, I videoed putting this back on the rear, and my GoPro overheated with the original battery in it, and when it does that, I guess it just loses footage. So I lost all the footage before I checked it, and I'm not going to take that stuff off again. But let me walk you through it so you'll know, especially on these Softails, because it is such a tight fit. Now you got three pieces here. You got the cover, you got the middle section, and then you've got the actual bottom, which contains the rocker arm assembly. Now when you put this on, it's a specific way that's really easy if you'll do it this way. So don't put your push rods in yet. Go ahead and take this. You will have to put this bolt that big bolt that goes for the rocker arms. There's 4 of them, 2 back there and 2 right here. You will have to put this one in because you won't have room to put it in once you put this on. Because when you put this on here, you're going to have to go ahead and put the gasket on it and go ahead and put this piece on it together. And with that one bolt in, and it'll go in with the push rods out. Then, once you've got this kind of seated down here, you can actually move this around, move it over here to the side, and then you can access your Allen head bolt here and back here. You can also move this base around and move the arms around and slide your push rods in. It's a close fit, but they do fit. Then you make sure you get your push rods seated on the arms and down on the lifters as well. And then you can have room to go ahead and do your 3 smaller bolts and you torque down your 4 main ones first, and then your 3 smaller bolts, and then your Allen bolts. Then you can slide this cover back over here, set it down. Then you got another gasket here, and then you just slide this cover in. But you have to put these 2 with the gasket in together when you're putting this bottom on. If you don't, you'll find once you put this on that you cannot get this in over the springs and over the lifters that are the push rods that you have to have in for this. So that's the way I do it. Put this together with the gasket and with this, with the push rods out and that one bolt right here in, and then put it on, and then you'll have to just kind of move things around to reach all your bolts and to tighten them down. So we've done that. The motor is officially back together and looking wonderful. Now what I want to do before I start putting everything else back on is I want to pull out my oil screen here, clean it out. It comes with a new O-ring. I'll put a new O-ring in there. I want to drop the oil out of the tank here and put a new oil filter on. Then when we put everything back together, we'll put the carb on, the air breather, the tank, hook all of our electrics up, hook the battery back up. I'll pull the spark plug wires off the plugs, and I'll let it crank for a little while. Now, it's not going to start up immediately because there's no gas in the carburetor and it's vacuumed from the petcock. So there's no gas going to flow until it's cranking. But what I want to do is build up some oil pressure, get some good oil going all through up here on the push rods, down through the lifters, everything getting oiled from the top down. Then we'll put the plug wires back on and we'll fire it. Now, in the Harley manual, there's a recommend break-in. I'm not going to say I don't like it, but let's say the S&S big bore kit break-in procedure I think is a lot better. So that's what I'm going to follow. And I'll show you the difference in those two break-ins. All right, we'll go ahead and change this oil, clean this oil screen out here. All right, there's a little O-ring there in this cap that we'll want to change out. And you got your little spring in here with the little screen right there. So with this screen, we'll want to blow it out with some carb cleaner. We'll clean that excess off. We'll put it back on our screen. We'll drop it back down in the hole. Now you can blow it out as well as you want, but that carb cleaner usually does good enough job. And we'll swap out this little O-ring here. Grease it up a little bit with the oil that's on there, and then we'll just compress that spring down and turn it back on. All right, that's done. Now we'll just go ahead and drop the oil and change the filter. All right, so I got everything back together. Got our exhaust on, floorboard on, crash bar back on. We got our motor mount on here. Got the carburetor on, all the plumbing ran through that. Got our coil back on, and then I've got my lines now, just my spark plug wires just hanging because I don't want it to start yet. I've got it in neutral. I changed the oil, put the new oil filter on. And some of you guys have asked about these split tanks, about taking them off and putting them on. So I'm going to go through that with you, and we're going to put on the split tanks. So I really like the split tank design that Harley kind of first come out with. They're easy to move. You don't have to worry about scratching up your paint. You got a mount here, a mount there, and a mount that goes on the top rail. So really nice. You got a crossover here, traditional, and then you got a vent tube up here that runs over to the other side of the tank. So to install these, you got your mounts here and here, and then the one there. So just like this, we'll get it started on there. We'll bring this one up and over. Make sure our wires are out of the way. Just like that. Go ahead and run our bolts in. As easy as that. We'll grab the other side here. The only difference in this side and the other side is that this has a vent tube that runs down the frame of the bike. So we'll feed this right above the top of the rocker box. Feed that line under here and go ahead and get it started. We'll hang that. Make sure our top's lining up. And we'll push these on. The tanks have rubber grommets on them. That'll help them slide in and won't be as bad vibration wise. And then that one right there. You'll have a rubber grommet that kind of goes around this, so make sure it's seated up on there well. Main switch is right here. You also have a connector. And then there's another, oh no, did I? Goodness gracious, I gotta take all this off. Nope, we're good. There we go. Whew. Scared me. All right, I wanted to do the longer ones first just because it's easier to move them around. Make sure we got a good snap. And this one here, good snap. There's only one way this will go on, so make sure you got it lined up right and just push it in. Now we can take our nut off the top of this and make sure that we've got room to run all these wires here. This actually has a tab that snaps on this to kind of keep it down and out of the way. You've got a tab here that runs into this hole with the grommet on it. So you'll start that first. That'll help you get it lined up. There we go. Got our nut here. Now, before we tighten this down, because it'll come down on here, we've got to run that sleeve up under here. It goes right up under here. All right, now we can tighten that up. Don't go crazy with it. It is metal, but it's really thin metal. It will crack and bust and should kind of bottom out on you. So that's it. Everything is back together on this bike except for the cam cover. Remember, we're going to leave that off so that we can inspect in case we need to change the timing on there, anything. All right, so before I hook the negative back up, I'm going to check the battery because you want a hot battery. We're going to crank it for a little bit just to get the oil pressure built up, and that'll actually fill the carb up with the gas. So we're going to check the battery and see what it's at. Let's see what our battery's looking like. 12.65, perfect. Okay, so the break-in procedure according to the manual, the Harley stock manual, is for the first 50 miles, maintain engine speed below 2,500 RPMs in any gear. Do not lug the engine, don't exceed 50 miles per hour during this period. From 50 to 500, vary the engine speed. Avoid prolonging steady running on one engine speed during this period. Increase engine speed to 3,000 RPMs. Do not exceed 55 miles per hour during this period. After the first 500 miles, the engine break-in is complete. That's the manual. However, on the S&S break-in, I like it a whole lot better. Now this is for twin cam, but I kind of try to follow this procedure. So after initial startup, run the engine approximately 1 minute at those RPM between 2550 or 1250 and 1750 RPMs. Don't touch the throttle. You're just letting it run for a minute. Then you shut it off. You check for leaks. Walk around the engine, look at everything. Then start it up again once it cools down. Run it for 3 to 4 minutes. Again, don't touch the throttle, and you'll do that procedure 3 more times. Now, this is mainly for fuel injected. Evolutions are going to be harder because they're choked. Well, most of the Evolutions are choked. Some have the early injections on them. But it might be harder. It might run at a higher RPM where you've got the choke on, let it warm up. Then after the engine's cooled, you're ready for the 500-mile break-in. The first 50 miles, of course, are the most critical. And then it says to run this not exceeding 25 miles or 2,500 RPMs, which is about the same as the stock manual tells to do it. However, we recommend changing the oil after the first 50 miles. So I think that's a good idea. Then your next 500 miles, it's kind of the same as the manual, and they recommend an oil change after that first 500 miles. For the balance of the 1,000 miles, the engine can be run normal, but at a conservative manner. And then you need to avoid, of course, overheating or putting any hard strain on the engine, no drag racing, dyno-tunes, excessive speeds, trailer towing, or sidecar operation. After the 1,000 miles, change the oil again, and now your break-in is done. So I like S&S's approach that it's, you let it run for a minute, let those rings kind of get seated in the bore of the cylinder, then you turn it off, you look for any leaks, run it 3 or 4 more minutes, look for leaks again, do your 50 miles, and I like how they recommend changing the oil in that. That gets rid of any kind of debris that, might have been done and those rings breaking in. All right, so we got everything back together. Put some gas in the tank. And for those of you that were asking, this bike has 40,000 miles on it. Well, a little bit over that, 40,002. So it was definitely time for a rebuild and all the upgrades we got. We still have the cam cover off because we might need to fine tune the adjusting a little bit. Let me make sure those little flatheads are secure. So we got the plug wires off. We're going to give it a crank just to let some oil pressure build up and get flowing everywhere. All right. Now we'll put the plugs in it, or the plug wires back on. And I found out the reason for his clothesline clip here. It's because his choke knob is broken. I will pull this out and we'll see what she does. All right, so that was a good minute run. Sounded great, boy. That lobe sounded nice. We'll look around for any type of leaks, but I want to tell you, everything looks really nice and clean and tight. Come to the other side. Even with the choke on, you can hear that good lobe in there. These new jugs are so shiny, it's hard to even, they almost look wet, you know? All right, it's cooled down enough. We'll try to run it without choke this time and see how it does. Oh yeah, that's a good sound right there. All righty. Well, everything looks good and tight. Everything sounds great. That cam, I love the sound of that cam. Now you may hear a little, well, not really a ticking, but it's just new stuff. Got to get kind of broke in. But I say this was a success, so thank you so much for hanging out in the shop with me today, and yesterday, and the day before, and last week, and the week before that. Tell your mama now I said hi.